Ivishwar asked me to do story. And of course, the ancient Vedic teachings are filled with really incredible narrations and accounts of really wonderful things. We live in a time where we don't actually appreciate history. Most of us don't even know where our great-grandparents, who they were and where they came from. That in more developed civilizations would be considered like, whoa, that's really atrocious. And we don't actually study, like in a lot of the older cultures, you know, it's like really prevalent in China and Japan and Korea and India and the Middle East, different parts where people are really steeped in their culture and their history. And knowing a lot about history actually tells you a lot about how to deal with things in life and what can happen. And you have sort of like benchmarks to sort of like measure how you're doing and how you are, whether you're being successful in dealing with different situations and things. You know, we're sort of like, we have this mentality, particularly in the Western world, that this is the way kind of like it's always been. But the time that we're living in is just like a little blip on the radar screen of history. We have experimented over the last 100 plus years, 120 years with democracies. I mean, since time immemorial, people lived in autocracies, you know, with royalty and things. And we have a sort of like an idea of what it was like then, but that's often portrayed in movies and things that are not representative of the ancient realities. In the Vedas, especially in the Puranas, which are supplemental literature in the Vedas, they are filled, I mean, they're monster works, they're just massive works. And they deal with, really in significant detail, historical things. Now, even if somebody didn't want to accept everything that occurred, there has been historical, and that's your personal choice. The things that they talked about and the things that they dealt with were really incredible. And they really significantly contribute to people's lives in terms of values, how we should live as societies, how we should live as individuals. What are the consequences of making different types of choices? Where does it go? You know, we don't even think about that. We've become so conditioned, you know, by the consumer propaganda that we're taught not to consider what are the consequences of our choices, the choices that we make and the actions that we take. And when we experience significant difficulty in this massive rise and epidemic of unhappiness that pervades the world and growing rates of suicide and depression, we just don't even tie it to what we're doing. Even if we kind of do a little bit, you know, we're not motivated to actually change course. In the Vedas, they speak about 12 personalities. Of course, there are limitless that are incredible examples, but there were 12 personalities that they categorized as what we call Mahajana. This means the greatest amongst people. And they were considered this way because of the exemplary way in which they live. Many of them didn't start out in a good place. They started out in sometimes significantly bad places, but they wrote the ending to their life in choices that they made. And their transformations and things that happened to them became incredibly exemplary. But one of these personalities, his name was Bhishma Deva. Bhishma Deva was born the son of a king. He had tremendous physical strength and ability. He was highly intelligent. He had like everything going for him. He had become a great scholar and a poet. He was an amazing warrior, both in terms of martial ability and his ability to command a battlefield. He was an expert politician. He knew the art of diplomacy and how to negotiate and do all of these kind of things. And so he was set for this, like, you know, the tradition was when dad died, the kid took over. So you inherit a kingdom. You have to work at it in order to maintain your standing. His situation was a little bit different. His mother left this world when he was quite young. And he, when he was a teenager already, into his, you know, approaching manhood, his father came across this most incredibly beautiful woman and he instantly fell in love, and he was just like going, you know, he turned into a babbling idiot pretty much. He was going to do anything to get this woman, and it was like, please, please, please. And the woman expressed her concern that with the way the political situation within in courts was that if she married him and she had children, that they may become dispossessed upon the death of the father, because he previously had another son. So it was kind of like, my children, their future, if I have children with you, hey, what's going to happen to them? And so the king was just like, he was pining. He couldn't eat. This guy had it really bad. And he was just like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And his son saw him in this state and felt such pity for him. He approached the woman and the father of the woman, and he said that I cannot tolerate to see my father suffering this way. Therefore, I will take a great vow. I will take a vow of celibacy. I will not sleep with even one woman in my life. And I will renounce my right to the throne. It's just like, what? You know, you're doing this because your dad's like a lovesick puppy. You know, you're gonna do that. And when he made this declaration and this vow, they say that, you know, a voice was heard from the sky, from the heavens, declaring from this day forth he should be known as Bhishma, the one that has taken like this terrible vow. You know, he had made this promise. And in those days, when people made a promise, they never broke it, no matter what it cost them. Same thing with truth. They did not lie. If you lied, you were kind of like an outcast from society. You told the truth, even if it meant terrible repercussions for you, because truth was important. It really, really was important, fundamental to living as human beings, not like animals or something. So he took this vow. The king got married, and he had 2 sons. And Bhishma, as he was known, now eventually his father died, and a regent, or he took over as a regent to help run the kingdom until the younger children could now assume control of the throne. So he had 3 half-brothers. The first was blind, which meant that they were disqualified from actually running a kingdom. The second one was an amazing person. His name was Pandu. And the third one was Vidura. Vidura was this extraordinarily saintly personality. And because the eldest person could not assume the throne, the second son took over the throne and ruled. He had 5 sons, and they were collectively known as the sons of Pandu. His elder brother, all his sons, there were vast numbers of them, were called the Kurus. So when Pandu died, then the children were all quite young. And again, Bhishma Deva came forward and administered for some time, but then turned over the administration of the kingdom to the blind king to manage things. This guy, his children were actually mixed, kind of good and really evil. And the idea that in the future they could perhaps take over the kingdom meant they would have to kill their cousins. And in those days, like, cousins were considered inseparable from brothers and sisters. So, you know, they still use a term in India like cousin brother or cousin sister, but they would often live in the same households. And these guys were just like, you know, from the Kuru side, were pretty evil. And they tried to poison, they tried to assassinate these young children. And it was like it became so precarious, they had to run off and hide in the forest along with their mother. And they grew up just moving from small village to small village like this until they grew. Before they had left, though, Bhishma Deva had taken charge of and engaged people to teach them all the skills of being a warrior and of being a king. And a couple of the sons of Pandu, Arjuna in particular, and his elder brother Yudhishthira, were extraordinary personalities, like really far out. So they lived in the forest. Grandfather Bhishma felt so terrible. He thought that they had actually died. There was this plot to burn down this palace where they were living and to destroy everything. They escaped unbeknown to others and then had to live a life kind of on the run. Eventually, as they grew up, they returned and demanded the kingdom be returned to them. And Grandfather Bhishma, he tried so hard to sort of like pacify everybody and keep it all together, but there arose irreconcilable differences. But there was, you know, some negotiation, some give and take along the way, and this is a massive story. It's contained in a book called the Mahabharata. The Mahabharata is like, it's larger than the Odyssey in terms of the number of verses and all the detail that it contains. So eventually the kids resurfaced. They were tricked and persecuted and forced into exile for 13 years. 12 years they had to, nobody was going to mess with them. But the deal was on the 13th year, if they were discovered, they had to go into exile for another 12 years. So, I mean, these guys just had it like, their life was unbelievably difficult and miserable. On this 13th year, they survived all in disguise, assisting in the court of a small kingdom The king was Virata. And when the time expired, the elder son that was to be the king, or thought he would be the king of the Kurus, his name was Duryodhana. Duryodhana had been anxiously wanting to catch them. He had spies out all over the place. And because the time had already come to an end, Grandfather Bhishma made a declaration. He said, if you want to find them, you should find that place where there is no famine, where people live with plenty, and where everyone is happy. And there you will find Yudhishthira. And it was just like, whoa, what's that? You know, and they talked about the impact that incredibly righteous and saintly people had on the broader population, and the effect that it had on everybody. So yeah, they were able to track them down, but it was kind of like too late, and things just got really messy and really nasty, and then everybody started taking sides, and Duryodhana declared that he wanted war. And so now there was this preparation for one of the greatest battles that was ever fought. It was like there were literally millions of people involved in this whole thing. And it was like this huge tragedy because it was fratricidal. It was family against family, which is of course not uncommon. And Grandfather Bhishma, because he had continued to live within the palace and accept food from the table of the sons of Kuru, he was obliged out of duty to take their side in the war and fight against his other grandsons that he loved so much and saw were incredibly pious. But he did because this was part of the conduct, the code that people lived by. And the code was like so clear, everybody knew where they stood. Everybody could see things with, you know, some clarity. So it got to this point where there was this huge battle, and kings from different kingdoms and their armies traveled from all over India to assemble up in North India, this great plain, which is considered also a holy place called Kurukshetra. When they lined up for battle, there were one thing that happened that was really astonishing was that because Yudhishthira was the elder of the 5 brothers, the younger brothers in these societies followed the elder brother, even if they didn't agree with him. And it was a way of maintaining a sense of order. And people learned about sacrifice and things. So Yudhishthira, he's out there, and these guys have got that full body armor on and the swords and weapons, and they're ready to go. And Yudhishthira looks at the opposing army, and there were 2 head generals. One of them was Bhishma. And he got down from his chariot and started walking towards the other side, the enemy lines. And his brothers all looked at each other and it was like, what the hell? And so they jumped off their chariots and started walking with him. And he took off his sandals and walked bare feet. Then he stripped all his armor off and was dropping it as he walked, and undid the belt and dropped his sword. And he removed the clothing on his upper body, and just in underwear, and they call it kopin, he approached, like in this utter vulnerability, he approached the other side and came up to the leading generals, and specifically to his grandfather, and he prostrated himself on the ground. And of course his brothers did the same thing. They had to. They were sort of like blind. Prostrated on the ground, offering their obeisance, offering their respect to their grandfather and to their superiors, and requesting permission to fight with them. Not only that, he asked for their blessing. And everybody was just like, whoa. And without hesitation, Grandfather Bhishma standing there, he was just this magnificent figure. His blessing was, may you be victorious. And everybody was like, whoa. You know, that was just like completely bad news. But it wasn't that he was, you know, not going to perform his duty, not that he was not going to fight to the best of his ability, but being a well-wisher of everyone. He sought everyone's desire should be fulfilled, that their happiness was important, even paramount. So he gave such a blessing, even if it was to his disadvantage. So then they returned and prepared. And it was at that time that the Bhagavad Gita was spoken, where Arjuna, the brother of Yudhishthira, was taken on his chariot. He asked Lord Krishna to take him between the lines and to drive down there so he could see on both sides those that were prepared now to give up their lives in battle. And he became overwhelmed by this sight, even though he's a great hero, become utterly overwhelmed, and he sought enlightenment from Krishna. And this is what the speaking of the Bhagavad Gita was about. That battle turned into one of the most ferocious and just unimaginable events. The number of people that died was incalculable. I mean, there were rivers of blood they talked about. I mean, it's not, you know, firing missiles and things. This is up close and personal. You take a weapon and you hack somebody to death. You know, it's like a horrible situation. Then the battlefields are littered with bodies. They try to remove them, but of course they can't remove everything, and wild animals come out to chew on them, and it's just like the most hellish scene. 10 days into the battle, Bhishma Deva, at first his grandson Duryodhana didn't trust him because of that, and because he knew that he had a place in his heart for these cousins of his. And so he wouldn't let him lead the entire army. And the man that was leading it, he was a great, although he was a Brahmin, he was a great warrior, general. He was killed. So now Grandfather Bhishma took charge. And Duryodhana spoke so insultingly to him, his grandfather, that, you know, I know you're not going to do your best, you're going to let these guys win, this kind of stuff, which really, you know, it was like, well, I couldn't handle this. And so it turned into this horrible fight that was so intense. And in the end, the favored grandson of Bhishma was the one who was going to kill him. He shot him so full of arrows, rapid fire, so full of arrows, that when he fell from his chariot, said not one part of his body touched the ground. I mean, you can't even imagine what that's like. You know, it was just like the most amazing thing and tragic thing. And when he fell, then they sounded conch shells, and the word spread that Bhishma had fallen, and everybody stopped fighting, and everybody paid respects to Bhishma Deva, because he was such a renowned philosopher, yogi, a great warrior, They call them Raja Rishis. Raja is king. Rishi is like a saintly, a great sage. And so a Raja Rishi is like a sage amongst the kings. And as he lay on the ground, his grandson approached him and wept. And he asked, "Is there anything that I can do?" And he said, "My neck is hanging. I feel rather uncomfortable." And so Arjuna took out his bow and quickly shot a series of arrows into the ground behind the head to make a support for the head. And Grandfather Bhishma said that was an appropriate headrest for a warrior. So they took leave, but they dug a trench around his body because he wasn't dying, he was just lying there, so that animals couldn't come and, chew on the carcass. And because he was a great mystic, he had ascertained by astrological calculation that this was not an appropriate moment to die, that he would hang on for a bit. And so he retained the life within his body. He did not eat. He drank water, but did not eat. So the battle continued for another 8 days. Then after that, the Pandavas entered the great city, Hastinapura, the city of elephants. And after undertaking appropriate services for the dead, they said they were going to return to the battlefield to see their grandfather. So they came, and when they arrived there, the whole place was surrounded by great sages and their disciples. Some had traveled even from the Middle East, and they record even some coming from parts of Europe who had foreseen that this great event was going to take place. And so there was this huge assembly. And the Pandavas and Lord Krishna entered and drew close. And when they saw Grandfather Bhishma lying in this way, they prostrated themselves on the ground, prostrate, offering respects and crying to see this horrible situation. And Lord Krishna knew what was going on, and he spoke in the sweetest way, but he declared that Bhishma was going to wait 56 days before he would leave. So he was going to hang out there. He'd already been there for like 9 days. Now he's going to wait another 56 days in this horrible condition, simply by his mystical power, control of his body and breath and everything, that he could sustain life within the body. And during this time, for 50 days, he spoke to his grandson, Yudhishthira. Yudhishthira was so overwhelmed by what had transpired in this battle, he was refusing to accept the throne. He said, "I cannot accept the throne at such a price. The death of so many orphans, so many widows were created. I cannot accept this throne." And in spite of everybody trying to prevail, get him to actually accept it, because it was in the interest of the general population for him to rule. He was so pious, he was so kind and so protective. Whenever he would move in the street on a horse or a chariot, people would bow on the ground to him. They loved him so intensely. But he was refusing to accept the throne. So now Grandfather Bhishma spoke to him. And there is this really extensive account of all the things that he spoke about. It's the words of a dying man. But these words were just absolutely, transcendently amazing. They were all filled with spiritual truth, but he spoke about how to govern. He spoke about how society should be organized, how people must offer protection and shelter to those that are in their care, and all of the things needed to create a prosperous and healthy and happy society that meant that people attained the purpose of human life. There was this really clear idea and understanding. Human life is for one purpose. It is for your spiritual liberation. That's the purpose of human life. All the other things that you do should help to support that purpose. But this is the very clear purpose. And so when people approached death, it was with a very clear understanding of what should be my state of consciousness at that moment of leaving this body. It's just like an extraordinary thing. But I was going to read to you a list of 9 things amongst the volumes and volumes of instruction that he gave. He had said that a person cannot be considered civilized without acquiring these 9 qualities. So this qualified you as a human being, not a spiritualist, not even a transcendentalist, just as an actual human being. He said these 9 things must be followed. And I think that there is a truth to them that is just as important today as in ancient times. And of course, we've mentioned the first one before. His first instruction to be qualified as a human being, you are not to become angry. And here we are in a country with one of the highest rates of domestic violence in the world. Really? How civilized are we when that's a statistic? When that's representative, of not a value, but a breakdown in values. And violence of any form, aggression like this, that's, it is always coming from anger. And this anger arises due to a lack of spiritual foundation. People not knowing how to exercise control of their mind, of their desires. People learning how to accommodate disappointment. Hey, life's hard. Life is really hard. Get a grip. Don't try to build a fantasy and then get all angry and upset when your fantasy is not coming to fruition. Just because life is difficult, it doesn't have to be a bummer. It can actually be wonderful and difficult at the same time. That's a pretty challenging idea. So he said, do not become angry. Second is not to lie. When you undermine truth, and my God, how we do that in our dealings with each other. Most relationships start out on the foundation of lies. We are fearful of even showing what we're really like, because then that person may not like us. And so I'm going to cheat. I'm going to pretend to be something else. I see things in them I don't like, but I think I'll change them later. But it looks like it's the best thing within reach at the moment, so I'm going for this. And there's all this pretense. And it goes through relationships, it goes through all kinds of dealings. And how can you function in a really healthy way if a relationship, if a society, if it's founded on lying? Third was to equally distribute wealth. This meant miserliness was considered an abhorrent quality, that one must learn to distribute, generously support those who are in great need, without discrimination. Fourth was to learn to forgive. This is one of the preliminary qualities for being a human being, to learn to forgive. It's actually the panacea for anger. Learning to forgive assuages the burning heart. One should only beget children by one's legitimate spouse. Of course, the floor is falling out on that one. People are, babies are popping out all over the place. And you have these extraordinary things where you have young men, and I'm singling them out because it leads to all kinds of problems, who grow up in households without a father to actually teach what is the duty and responsibility to live as a man. It's in the developed world, and now increasingly in these older cultures, it's becoming such a common thing, but it's considered highly destructive. To be pure in mind and hygienic in body. Seventh was to not be inimical towards anyone. Eighth was to be simple. But this has a very specific and wonderful meaning. To be simple in your tastes, in your demands, in your desires, in your life. To be frugal, to not be extravagant, but to be very generous. Generosity and extravagance were two different things. Extravagance is about me trying to, maximize my enjoyment of things. And the ninth was to support subordinates as one's own children. So that meant somebody that employed others, that I should see them, and that included domestic workers in one's household and everything. I should see them and treat them in the same way that I treat my children. It's pretty far out. And it was all possible because people had a higher view of life. So after 56 days of giving instruction, they set up an encampment, and every day Yudhisthira would come and listen to his grandfather, who would speak for hours in this horrible condition. And then on the 56th day, this astrological or astronomical shift occurs. And it has to do with the path of the sun. So now a time of great auspiciousness had arrived, and he gave up speaking and he fixed his mind, his vision on the divine personality and became deeply absorbed in a highly ecstatic spiritual state. And in this samadhi, he voluntarily left his body, and everybody was stunned to witness how somebody had so much control that they could not only continue to live within the body at that time, but at their chosen moment, they could voluntarily relinquish it. Instantly, all of the sages began to chant sacred mantras. There was a great kirtan that began, and it was said that actual flowers fell from the sky upon his body. It was an extraordinary event. So, given that we have such short time, that was like a real, a fast look. And of course, I have not done justice to this great saintly personality and what it was that he actually demonstrated in his life and what he taught and what he gave to the world. But that was my humble attempt to give you a brief look into the life of Bhishma Deva. Okay, anybody have a question? Was that of interest or no? Yeah? These people were extraordinary. You know, the way they could live so selflessly was extraordinary. Thank you very much. And we will have kirtan. Well, what am I using? This one here? Okay. The dad machine. Haribol. Thank you.